I knew it was going to happen heading into the Week 7 matchup between the Broncos and the Colts, with Peyton Manning returning with his new team, the Broncos, to Indianapolis to face his old team. I knew there was going to be a shitstorm of controversy surrounding Jim Irsay. He just has that magical gift for foot and mouth disease. He really does. And that's what makes him a great Twitter follow, and that's what makes him a good owner to pay attention to. He does make it good for the league sometimes because he creates some controversy. But then there are times where he really doesn't do something that's controversial, but because it's good for business to have something be controversial, things are made and manufactured into being controversial. And what I mean is, in the build-up to that Week 7 matchup between the Broncos and the Colts, which, by the way, I accurately predicted the Colts were going to win, Jim Irsay said the following in an interview. We changed our model a little bit because we wanted more than one of these, and he held up his hand to show off his ring from Super Bowl 41. Tom Brady never had consistent numbers, but he has 3 of these. Pittsburgh has 2. The Giants have 2. Baltimore has 2. And we have 1. That leaves you frustrated. You make the playoffs 11 times, and you're out in the first round 7 out of 11 times. You love to have the Star Wars numbers from Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison and Reggie Waynes, but mostly you love this. And that is, of course, him holding up again his hand to demonstrate his lone Super Bowl ring. And apparently, this was an excuse for ESPN, not surprisingly, and the rest of the national sports media to jump into, oh my God, how outrageous that anybody ever say anything slightly negative in regards to Peyton Manning. You know, we have to understand that the national sports media feels like it's good for business to defend Peyton Manning because it is good for the NFL's business to protect and defend Peyton Manning, because in a lot of ways he is their poster child. Look at all the commercials he's on. Look at all the endorsements he does. Look at all the exposure and ratings and ticket sales and merchandise sales that a Peyton Manning brings to the NFL. You don't want to sit there and have your poster child, your golden child, your marquee name of marquee names in the league get constantly shit on all the time. That's not good for business. And if you think for any 1 second that at times the national media doesn't do their part to make sure that Peyton Manning and that brand name are protected, then you are fooling yourselves. But what I don't understand here is why there's such an outrage over what Jim Irsay said. If you were an owner, would you rather have an offense that sets all types of records over the years and scores a bunch of points? Or would you rather have Super Bowl rings? Nothing that he said here, I think, was that far out of bounds. He didn't sit there and crap on Peyton Manning as a player, a quarterback, a leader, a person. All he said is, great to have these numbers, but mostly you love to have these rings. There's nothing wrong with saying that. I think any owner in his position would feel the exact same way. And in fact, ironically enough, whereas John Fox gets all pissed off about this because he's a douchebag and he sits there and wants to get pissed and say, it's a low blow, that's a cheap shot, that's classless. I bet you Peyton Manning would agree. He would rather throw for 2,500 yards a year and have 4 or 5 Super Bowl rings than the numbers he has over his career to only having 1 Super Bowl ring. You would think anyways, if he has the right state of mind that an NFL player and especially a starting quarterback in the NFL should have. Well, to me, there is no denying Peyton Manning's clear impact on the Indianapolis Colts as an organization. He was a part of the organization for 14 years, from the time he was the number 1 overall pick in the 1998 draft until the end of the 2011 season. And in that time, he started over 200 consecutive games. He led the Colts to 8 divisional titles. He led them to 11 10-plus win seasons, 11 playoff appearances, 2 conference championships, a Super Bowl championship in Super Bowl 41. And you think about it, you could really legitimately make the argument that in a lot of ways he helped save that Colts franchise, because that Colts franchise was in a lot of trouble in the late 90s, and they weren't very good. Yeah, you had that 95 season with those cardiac Colts with Jim Harbaugh leading the way, but that was that fluke season. There were a lot of bad years in the 80s and the 90s with the Colts, and Peyton Manning really brought that organization back to respectability and saved that organization in a lot of ways. And you could definitely argue that Lucas Oil Stadium, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is the house that Peyton Manning built. And you could even argue his last season in Indianapolis, the 2011 season, when he missed the entire season with his neck injuries, that Peyton Manning still help the organization because the team was so bad that year they ended up with the number 1 overall pick in a year where Andrew Luck happened to be coming into the draft out of Stanford. Just think about that. Of all the years for Peyton Manning to miss a season, it had to be the 2011 season where the Colts could get the number 1 pick in 2012 and end up taking Andrew Luck. So there is no denying, on many different levels, the tremendous impact Peyton Manning had on the Indianapolis Colts and, frankly, the National Football League as a whole. He's arguably the greatest regular season quarterback of all time, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, and one of the true marquee star attractions of the NFL over the past 30 or 40 years, and that can't be denied. However, the Colts, when you really look at them, they basically in the 2000s became the NFL's version of the Atlanta Braves, a team that made the playoffs most every single year, yet more often than not failed to win a championship, and most times failed to even reach the championship game. I mean, if you really think about it, during Peyton Manning's 13 full seasons that he actually played from 98 to 2010 in Indianapolis, the Colts were one and done in the playoffs 7 times. 7 times. Out of 11 playoff appearances, they only won 2 conference championships and only won 1 Super Bowl title. They lost the second time they went to the Super Bowl when he faced off with a real marquee quarterback in Drew Brees. And you could even argue, how great is that 1 Super Bowl victory? Yeah, it was a Super Bowl victory. You could never take that away. But he beat Rex Grossman. Rex Grossman. That's who Peyton Manning had to beat. Arguably the worst starting quarterback in Super Bowl history. That's who Peyton Manning had to beat to win his 1 ring. So when you've got Jim Irsay saying that Star Wars numbers are great and these statistics are wonderful and all of this, but I'd rather have the rings, what's so wrong with that? And what's so wrong to say, hey, you know, it's great that Peyton Manning does all these gyrations and all this audibling at the line and all this other crap. But maybe, just maybe, and you see this in games over the years, sometimes in the big moments, maybe he overthinks things, he overanalyzes things, and he becomes his own worst enemy. And as a result, he traditionally has not played well in the big spots. What, a 9-11 career playoff record? And a lot of times your national sports media is telling you that this guy is the greatest quarterback of all time, when he's been to the playoffs so many times, had so many chances, has only 1 world championship to show for it, and has a career losing record in the playoffs. Just think about that for a second. Just think about that. But what Jim Irsay said about numbers and the fact that he would rather have rings, that was so controversial. I really don't get it because he's spot on. The Colts for many years were a great regular season team that did put up all types of great numbers, consistently won double-digit games year in and year out, and then would consistently fall short in big spots and big moments, in big opportunities in the big games. That's not always on Peyton Manning, but you can't completely absolve Peyton Manning of all the blame because he had numerous poor performances in big games. You know, it's one of these things I always find it interesting when it comes to Peyton Manning. He gets 100% of the credit, it seems like 95% of the time. But 95% of the time, he gets maybe 10% of the blame. It's like it's swept under the rug. Oh, you look at what happened with the Denver Broncos last year in the playoffs. There are all these excuses made about this and that. And you even see people like in Denver, they're sitting there on the blogs talking about, oh, they only lost because of the Hail Mary and da-da-da. Did you forget the fact that Peyton Manning did not play particularly well in that game? Are you forgetting the fact that Peyton Manning threw that horrible pick in overtime that led to the Ravens kicking and getting the game-winning score? Are we forgetting all of these things? It's just fantastical to me how much so many sports fans buy into the Peyton Manning propaganda and BS that they're force-fed by the national sports media. Like it is unseemly and uncalled for to ever call into question anything pertaining to Peyton Manning. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, Peyton Manning is one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, arguably the greatest regular season quarterback in NFL history. He had a tremendous impact on the Indianapolis Colts. He had a tremendous impact on the NFL and still does. But nothing that Jim Irsay said was that far out of bounds. In fact, I argue that the Colts are better with Andrew Luck. They're better off with Andrew Luck, and now I'm going to tell you why. And I don't apologize for saying it either. I firmly believe that the Indianapolis Colts are better off now and in the future with having Andrew Luck as a starting quarterback as opposed to Peyton Manning. Why? I'll tell you why. Andrew Luck is 24 years old and healthy. Peyton Manning is 37 and has a bad neck and could potentially always be one hit away from his career being over. I'll take the 24-year-old promising franchise quarterback who could develop into an elite quarterback over the 37-year-old elite quarterback who is at the very tail end of his career and has some major durability concerns. I also look at this from an overall team building and salary cap picture. What comes along with Peyton Manning and his name and his pedigree and his numbers and statistics is a huge salary cap figure. A salary cap figure that ties up a lot of money into one position and into one player and makes it a little more challenging to build a competitive ball club around Peyton Manning. Look at his cap figure in 2014, 15, and 16. 2014, next season, $17.5 million for his cap figure. The next 2 years after that, each season, $21.5 million. That's $60.5 million in the salary cap in 3 years, tied up into one player at one position, Peyton Manning. Yes, quarterback is the most important position in professional sports in the world, no question. However, that is an awful lot of money to tie up into somebody who next year will be 38, the year after that 39, and the year after that 40. Now look at Andrew Luck. He was the number 1 overall pick in the 2012 NFL draft. But with this better rookie salary structure, with this rookie cap, his salary is much more cap and team friendly when you're trying to rebuild a team like the Indianapolis Colts have been trying to rebuild. 2014, his cap figure isn't the $17.5 million that Peyton Manning has, it's a little over $6 million. 2015, instead of being $21.5 million into Peyton Manning, you're $7 million into Andrew Luck. In 2016, the Colts have a club option for a 5th year, where if they picked it up, which you would assume they would, he would get the franchise tag, basically, the average of the top 10 quarterback salaries in the NFL, which you know at that time might be 14, 15 million. So looking at that, nowhere in the next 3 seasons, after the 2013 season, does Andrew Luck's salary come anywhere close to Peyton Manning's. That frees up an awful lot of cap money and an awful lot of salary to plug into other places to build a team around Andrew Luck compared to if he still had Peyton Manning in Indianapolis, where you would have all this money tied up into one position. It would place such a great emphasis on having to hit on every single pick. You'd have to be much more selective in free agency. You wouldn't be able to spend as much. It just allows you more wiggle room. It allows you more room for error, but it also allows you to be more aggressive and do more things. And with Peyton Manning being there, you're always in that mode to win and win now, like the Denver Broncos are. They have a very small window of opportunity to win a world championship. And that pretty much is as long as Peyton Manning is there, and maybe not even for the entire time, maybe this year and next year, and that might be it. So that pressure is going to be on, with an aging team in the Broncos to continue to bring in veterans because you need to win and you need to win right now, and the time to win is right now. Whereas with Andrew Luck, you could take your time with the Indianapolis Colts because you have your franchise piece and you could assemble those pieces around him so that way in a couple of years you can get to the point where you could be this generation's version of the New England Patriots. You can be that next great dynasty. You could come up with what Peyton Manning and his Colts of the 2000s couldn't, and that is more than one Super Bowl championship. You've really got, ultimately, with Peyton Manning out of the picture, a more balanced team approach, whereas you're focusing just as much on building up a stout defense as you are an explosive offense, as opposed to with Peyton Manning, and understandably so, you have Peyton Manning. First and foremost priority is protect Peyton Manning and give him all the weapons you possibly can. Now, to be fair to the Colts, they had done a good job over the years during Peyton's time of drafting defensive players, whether it be Dwight Freeney or Bob Sanders, just to name a couple. But the primary emphasis was always placed on the offense. And you can see it now with the Indianapolis Colts. As an organization, they're trying to be a little more balanced, well-balanced, and they're not only trying to win now, but they are still in the process of building for the future. If you had Peyton Manning there, you wouldn't necessarily have that luxury. Having Andrew Luck there has bought you some time with your fan base, has bought some time for your organization to potentially really be able to build something special that could play itself out over the course of 8 to 10 years. So hell yeah, at this moment, the Indianapolis Colts are better off with Andrew Luck than they are with Peyton Manning. That even includes if somehow Peyton Manning decides to not choke in a big game this year and actually leads the Denver Broncos to a Super Bowl championship. You know what? Hey, great for Peyton Manning. That's outstanding. You got as many Super Bowl rings as your brother if you do that. That's great for the Denver Broncos. Gives you a third Super Bowl championship to go along with your 4 Super Bowl losses over the years. But the bottom line is that long term, the Indianapolis Colts are in a much better place than the Denver Broncos. And that primarily is because they have Andrew Luck, who's 24 and cheaper, as opposed to Peyton Manning, who's 37 and much more expensive. And that's just the way it is. So I don't know why anything that Jim Irsay said with what I quoted earlier was all that controversial, because he was right. He was absolutely right. The bottom line is, it's not about statistics. It's not about numbers. It's about championships. Everybody usually says that. But when it comes to Peyton Manning, it's like, oh, look at all these numbers he puts up. Wait a second. I thought it was about championships. I thought it was about rings ultimately at the end of the day, because football is a team sport first and foremost. And if you're in a team sport, the most important thing to do is win a championship as a team. Therefore, who gives a shit about the great offensive numbers if you're not winning championships? Jim Irsay's 100% right. I'd rather have Tom Brady's 3 rings than Peyton Manning's 1. I'd rather have Big Ben's 2 than Peyton Manning's 1. I'd rather have his brother Eli Manning's 2 rings than Peyton Manning's 1. Just think about that. I'd rather have the Baltimore Ravens 2 rings than Peyton Manning's 1. The Indianapolis Colts are better off with Andrew Luck, period.